He stole my inheritance, then invited me to her lavish wedding. I brought a gift she'd never forget. The embossed envelope felt cold and alien in my hands, a stark contrast to the warmth I remembered from grandfather's will. An invitation, it declared, to celebrate the union of Amelia Vance and Julian Thorne. The irony was so thick, I could almost taste it. Amelia, the woman who, with Julian's slick manipulation, had convinced everyone, including our grieving parents, that I was unfit to manage my own inheritance, that Sohn was the responsible one. And now, a wedding invitation. Subscribe to our channel to hear the rest of the story. My breath hitched, a silent gasp of disbelief and rage. Slavish. The word pulsed in my mind, mocking me. Lavish, as if she hadn't emptied the accounts meant to secure my future. Lavish, as if she hadn't systematically dismantled my life while building her own, on the foundations of my loss. The paper trembled, my fingers tightening around it until the edges dug into my skin. My inheritance. Gone. Siphoned away by Amelia's feigned concern and Julian's predatory charm. And this invitation was her ultimate victory lap. A gilded taunt delivered right to my doorstep. The initial shock gave way to a searing anger that burned in my chest, a familiar, unwelcome companion. I paced my small apartment, the familiar worn carpet a stark reminder of what was no longer mine to command. Grandfather's house, the sprawling estate with its manicured gardens, the antique furniture that held generations of memories. All of it was now a backdrop for Amelia's supposed happiness. And Julian, the man who had whispered sweet nothings in my ear while simultaneously plotting with Amelia, was now to be her husband. The sheer audacity of it was almost artistic, a twisted, cruel masterpiece. For days, the invitation lay on my coffee table, a constant, gnawing reminder. I replayed every conversation, every subtle suggestion Amelia had made, every time Julian had gently steered me away from financial matters. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. They hadn't just taken my money, they had stolen my trust, my sense of security, my future. The legal battles had been draining, costly, and ultimately fruitless. Amelia, with her perfectly rehearsed sob stories and her conveniently placed evidence, had painted me as unstable, incapable. And the court, swayed by her performance, had sided with her. But the anger, while powerful, wasn't enough. It fueled me, yes, but it didn't offer a solution. I needed something more. Something that would speak louder than Amelia's smug pronouncements, something that would resonate in that opulent ballroom and expose the rot beneath the polished surface. I needed to give her a gift she would truly never forget. Not a silk scarf or a silver picture frame. Not a token gesture that would be lost in the mountain of expensive trinkets she would undoubtedly receive. No, this gift had to be significant. It had to be a mirror reflecting the ugliness of her actions. My mind, usually a chaotic whirlwind of anxieties and regrets, began to focus. I started sifting through the remnants of my former life, not with sadness, but with a newfound purpose. I rummaged through old photo albums, not for memories but for evidence. I unearthed forgotten documents, tucked away in dusty boxes, that whispered tales of Amelia's past indiscretions, her financial struggles before she'd met Julian. It was a grim excavation, but with each unearthed truth, a plan began to solidify. The idea started small, a flicker of inspiration, and grew with an almost unstoppable momentum. It was audacious, perhaps even a little dangerous, but it felt right. It felt like justice. I knew Amelia. I knew her vanity, her obsession with appearances, her desperate need for validation. And I knew that the grander her wedding, the more she would want it to be perfect, a testament to her flawless life. That was her weakness, and I was about to exploit it. The preparations were meticulous, requiring a level of stealth and precision I hadn't known I possessed. I contacted old friends, people Amelia had alienated, people who had seen her true colors but had been too afraid to speak up. I explained my plan, and to my surprise, I found willing allies, united by their own quiet resentments. We worked in secret, coordinating our efforts, each person playing a crucial role in the unfolding drama. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity. I bought myself a new dress, something elegant and understated, a stark contrast to the gaudy displays Amelia favored. It was a simple black gown, but it felt like armor. I practiced my smile in the mirror, a cool, detached expression that hid the tempest raging within. I needed to be calm, composed, and utterly in control when I walked into that room. The gift itself was the most challenging part. It involved a significant amount of research, some clever negotiation, and a willingness to tread very carefully. I couldn't resort to anything illegal, anything that would land me in trouble. But I could use the truth, and the truth, as they say, has a power all its own. I spent hours in libraries, in old courthouse records, piecing together a narrative that was both undeniable and devastating. Finally, the day arrived. The wedding was held at a sprawling country estate, the kind Amelia had always dreamed of. The air was thick with the scent of expensive flowers and the murmur of polite conversation. Crystal chandeliers glittered, reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Amelia, a vision in white, was radiant, her smile wide and triumphant. Julian stood by her side, his arm possessively around her waist, looking every inch the devoted husband. I entered the reception hall, a ghost at the feast, and found a quiet corner to observe. The room was filled with Amelia's friends and family, all dressed in their finest, their faces a mix of genuine joy and feigned admiration. Amelia, accustomed to being the center of attention, noticed me and a flicker of something. Surprise? Unease? Crossed her face before she quickly masked it with a dazzling smile and a dismissive wave. As the evening wore on, the toasts began. Each one lauded Amelia and Julian's love, their success, their perfect future. It was a symphony of praise, a carefully orchestrated narrative of bliss. Then, it was time for the gifts. The bride and groom, beaming, opened box after box, exclaiming over each offering. And then, it was my turn. I walked forward, the small, elegantly wrapped package in my hand. Amelia's eyes met mine, a hint of triumph in their depths, as if to say, "You came. You actually came." I offered a small, knowing smile and placed the gift on the table beside the other presents. The moment was electric. All eyes were on me, and then on Amelia as she picked up my offering. The wrapping was simple, the card bearing only my name. As she tore away the paper, the carefully constructed facade of her perfect life began to crumble. The anticipation in the room was palpable, a silent hum of curiosity that settled over the guests. Amelia, her manicured fingers already at the ribbon, offered a bright, almost brittle smile. Julian, ever the suave protector, leaned in, his arm a subtle barrier between her and the outside world. His eyes, however, flickered with a sharper glint, a predatory awareness that I recognized all too well. He'd likely anticipated a passive-aggressive token, a subtle dig at best, but nothing prepared him for what was about to unfold. Amelia unfolded the tissue paper with a practiced flourish, her smile widening as she revealed not a velvet box or a decorative vase, but a slim, leather-bound ledger. The cover was unadorned, its aged leather whispering of secrets held within. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the expected extravagance, nor the predictable sentimental gesture. This was different. Amelia's smile faltered for a nanosecond, her eyes darting to mine, a question forming, a nascent unease blooming behind the carefully applied makeup. She opened the ledger, and her perfectly crafted composure began to crack. It wasn't a simple accounting of transactions. It was a meticulously compiled chronicle. The first page was a stark, handwritten entry, detailing the initial transfer of funds from grandfather's estate. Beside it, in a different, bolder hand, Julian's, unmistakably, were notes, amendments, justifications that read like self-serving justifications and outright lies. My breath caught in my throat, even though I knew every word. every detail. Seeing it laid bare, documented, was a visceral experience. The subsequent pages were a damning testament to their calculated deception. Each entry was a carefully selected piece of evidence, meticulously cross-referenced. There were scanned copies of falsified documents, printouts of emails where Julian advised Amelia on how to manage my difficulties, subtle manipulations of my financial advisors, and even damning internal memos from Julian's former firm highlighting his unethical practices in asset management. I hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had systematically dismantled my financial standing, making it appear as though I had actively squandered it. Amelia's eyes scanned the pages, her face paling with each revelation. The vibrant flush of happiness drained away, replaced by a sickly pallor. The polite applause for previous gifts had long since died down, replaced by a stunned silence. The murmur of polite conversation had evaporated, leaving a vacuum filled with the stark rustle of paper as Amelia's trembling fingers turned the pages. Julian's arm around her tightened, his gaze fixed on the ledger with an expression that was a chilling blend of disbelief and fury. He whispered something to Amelia, his voice a low, guttural rumble that only those closest to them could hear. Amelia, however, was no longer listening. She was trapped in the narrative I had so carefully constructed, a story that was unfolding page by damning page in front of everyone she had ever sought to impress. The ledger contained not only financial records but also a carefully curated selection of personal correspondence. Letters Amelia had sent to my parents, feigning concern for my well-being, laced with subtle insinuations about my instability. There were also printed conversations from private messaging apps, where Julian had coached Amelia on what to say, how to act, how to paint me as unreliable. One particular exchange, detailing a plan to exploit a minor health issue I'd had years prior to further solidify their narrative of my incapacitation, brought a gasp from a distant table. Amelia's breath came in ragged gasps. Her initial radiant glow had transformed into a mask of sheer terror. Her carefully chosen words, her practiced charm, her entire carefully constructed persona was disintegrating before hundreds of witnesses. The opulent ballroom, moments ago a testament to her triumphant success, now felt like a stage for her public unraveling. Julian, ever the pragmatist, attempted to regain control. He reached for the ledger, his intention clearly to snatch it away, to bury the truth once more. But I had anticipated this. As his hand moved, I spoke, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the hushed silence. "You know, Julian," I began, my gaze locked on him. "It's fascinating how much effort goes into building a perfect life, especially when that perfection is built on the foundations of another's ruin." My words hung in the air, a stark counterpoint to the saccharine toasts that had preceded them. Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a desperate plea, or perhaps a renewed surge of defiance. Julian's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing into predatory slits. "My grandfather," I continued, my voice gaining a quiet authority, "always believed in transparency. He left me his estate not just as an inheritance, but as a legacy of integrity. And I felt it was only right that this union, this grand celebration of your future, should be graced with that same integrity." I gestured towards the ledger, still clutched in Amelia's shaking hands. "This isn't just a gift, Amelia. It's a statement that the truth, however inconvenient, always has a way of surfacing, and that the foundations you've built your happiness upon are, to put it mildly, rather unstable." The guests, initially stunned into silence, began to stir. Whispers turned into audible murmurs. Faces turned towards Amelia and Julian, no longer with admiration, but with a dawning realization, a mixture of shock and indignation. The carefully curated guest list, designed to impress and solidify their social standing, was now witnessing their spectacular downfall. Amelia finally found her voice, a choked sob escaping her lips. This is a fabrication. She's lying." Her words were weak, unconvincing, drowned out by the rising tide of suspicion. Julian, his composure shattered, glared at me, his face contorted with rage. "You're insane," he spat, his voice a venomous hiss. This is a malicious attempt to ruin us." "Ruin you?" I echoed, a slow, sad smile gracing my lips. "No, Julian. I'm merely holding a mirror to your actions, a mirror that reflects precisely what you are." I pulled out a small, sleek digital voice recorder from my clutch. "You see," I explained, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "This ledger contains not only documentary evidence, but also audio recordings. Recordings of your discussions, Amelia, regarding the manipulation of my finances, and recordings of you, Julian, advising her on the best way to proceed. We were able to corroborate many of these conversations with metadata, confirming the dates and times of your strategic planning." The revelation sent a fresh wave of shock through the assembly. Amelia let out a strangled cry and, in her panic, dropped the ledger. It landed on the polished floor with a resounding thud, pages fanning out, revealing more incriminating details. Julian lunged for the ledger, but a smartly dressed man, one of my former financial advisors, who had been discreetly placed at a nearby table, intercepted him. "I believe, Mr. Thorne," the advisor said calmly, his voice resonating with a quiet authority, "that you have some explaining to do regarding certain transactions you advised Ms. Vance to make." The carefully orchestrated facade of the wedding had irrevocably crumbled. The lavish celebration was now a spectacle of betrayal and exposure. Amelia, tears streaming down her face, her perfect makeup smudged and ruined, looked utterly broken. Julian, his veneer of charm completely stripped away, stood like a cornered animal, his eyes darting frantically, searching for an escape that no longer existed. My gift was not a tangible object for them to keep and discard. It was a narrative, meticulously crafted, delivered with undeniable proof. It was the truth, amplified and broadcasted to the very people Amelia had desperately sought to impress. It was a mirror held up to their dishonesty, a reflection of their greed and manipulation, displayed on the grandest stage they had chosen for themselves. As the guests began to discreetly, then more overtly, withdraw, murmuring their disgust and shock, I felt a profound sense of calm settle over me. The anger that had burned within me for so long had finally found its release, not in violence or revenge, but in the quiet, undeniable power of truth. I picked up my small clutch, the digital recorder nestled safely inside. As I turned to leave, Amelia's broken whisper reached me. "Why?" I paused, my gaze falling on her, a pitiable figure amidst the scattered remnants of her failed facade. "Because, Amelia," I said, my voice soft, devoid of malice, "Grandfather taught me that true wealth isn't measured in money but in integrity, and I refused to let that be stolen from me." I walked out of the reception hall, the sounds of Amelia's sobs and Julian's furious, unheard exclamations fading behind me. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome balm after the suffocating opulence of the ballroom. My inheritance was still gone, the legal battles had been costly and draining, and the emotional scars would take time to heal. But I had reclaimed something far more valuable, my own sense of self-respect, my agency, and the knowledge that even in the face of calculated deception, the truth, when wielded with purpose, could be the most unforgettable gift of all. The story was far from over. It was merely beginning its next chapter, one built not on stolen foundations, but on the solid ground of my own resilience. The invitations to my own future, I knew, would be entirely different. The cool night air was indeed a balm, a stark contrast to the cloying perfume and manufactured smiles of the reception. As I walked away from the echoing whispers of scandal, a strange sense of quiet settled within me. It wasn't the triumphant roar of vindication, but a more profound stillness, the kind that follows a long, arduous storm. The legal battles, the years of feeling adrift and betrayed, had taken their toll. My inheritance was gone, a phantom limb aching with the memory of what should have been. But the ledger, the digital recorder, the carefully placed former advisor, these were the instruments of a different kind of reclamation. The drive home was a blur of muted city lights. I replayed the events in my mind, the precise timing of each reveal, the subtle shifts in the guests' expressions. Julian's initial smirk of smug certainty, Amelia's progressively panicked eyes, the slow, dawning horror on the faces of their carefully chosen audience. It was a meticulously choreographed unraveling, a performance art piece where the actors, unaware of their roles, played their parts with devastating authenticity. Upon arriving at my modest apartment, a place that had become my sanctuary from the gilded cage of my former life, I sank onto the worn sofa. The silence was a welcome friend. I didn't feel the urge to celebrate, or even to dissect the victory. Instead, a deep weariness washed over me. The fight had been exhausting, a constant gnawing anxiety that had fueled my actions. Now, with the immediate confrontation concluded, the sheer scale of what had transpired began to truly sink in. The next few days were a whirlwind of necessary yet somber activities. My lawyer, a formidable woman named Evelyn, contacted me to discuss the fallout. The ledger, along with the audio recordings and my advisor's statement, formed an irrefutable case. The guests, many of whom were influential figures in business and society, were already buzzing. Confidentiality agreements were less a deterrent than a whisper in the wind when reputations were at stake, and the truth, especially one so publicly and undeniably presented, had a way of spreading like wildfire. Amelia and Julian, I learned, had fled the reception shortly after my departure. The whispers among the former guests were of a messy public divorce and a swift descent from social grace. Julian's firm had initiated an internal investigation, and I received a discreet but firm notification that my former financial advisor, the one I'd strategically placed at the wedding, had been instrumental in uncovering a pattern of malfeasance that extended far beyond my own stolen inheritance. Their carefully constructed empire, built on a foundation of deceit, was beginning to crumble from within. Evelyn advised me that the initial legal proceedings were effectively over. The evidence was so overwhelming that a settlement, albeit one that would still involve significant financial restitution, was likely inevitable. Julian, facing professional ruin and potential criminal charges, was now desperate. Amelia, stripped of her gilded cage and her meticulously crafted persona, was likely facing a far more bleak reality. But the legalities, the financial repercussions, the social fallout, these were secondary to the internal shift I was experiencing. The anger, which had been my constant companion, had transformed. It was no longer a burning rage, but a quiet resolve. I had taken back not just my inheritance, but my agency. I had demonstrated to myself and to the world that I would not be a victim. One evening, a few weeks after the wedding, I received a cryptic message. It was from an unknown number, simply stating, "The owl sees in the dark. Meet me at the old observatory, midnight." The phrasing, the veiled threat, the inherent mystery, all pointed to a familiar shadow. It was likely Julian, attempting one last, desperate gambit. Despite the inherent risk, a part of me felt a strange compulsion to go. The old observatory, a relic of my grandfather's scientific pursuits, held a certain significance. It was a place of quiet contemplation, a place where he had taught me about the vastness of the universe and the enduring power of observation. As I drove to the deserted hilltop, the sky was a canvas of stars, the very ones my grandfather had encouraged me to study. The observatory itself was a skeletal silhouette against the inky blackness. The air was cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I found him standing by the rusted telescope, a figure cloaked in shadow. Even in the dim light, his posture radiated a coiled, desperate energy. His suave protector facade had long since been shed, replaced by something raw and untamed. "You expected me," I stated, my voice calm, projecting into the stillness. He turned, his face a mask of weary defiance. "You orchestrated a public humiliation, girl. You ruined everything." His voice was rough, stripped of its usual silken cadence. "I exposed the truth, Julian," I corrected, stepping closer, the crunch of gravel under my shoes the only sound besides the whisper of the wind. "Your everything was built on lies." "Lies that kept you comfortable," he retorted, his voice rising. "That provided Amelia with the life she deserved. You think your grandfather's money was meant for your perpetual navel-gazing? He would have wanted it to fuel ambition, to build empires, not to be frittered away on sentimentality." I shook my head, a slow, pitying gesture. "You misunderstand ambition, Julian. Ambition is about creation, about building something lasting. You engaged in destruction. You dismantled my life to feather your own nest. There's no empire built on the ashes of another's ruin." He took a step towards me, his fists clenched. "And what about you? What's your grand plan now? Are you going to play the martyr? Live off the scraps of restitution? That's not living, that's just existing in the shadow of what was taken." "My plan," I said, meeting his furious gaze, "is to build something new. Something that isn't tainted by greed or deceit. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just the money, Julian. It was his integrity. That's the inheritance I truly value, and that's what I've reclaimed." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Integrity? You think integrity pays the bills? You think it buys you respect?" "It buys me self-respect," I countered, my voice unwavering. "And that, Julian, is worth more than any sum you could ever steal." He lunged, not with overt aggression, but with a desperate grab for my arm, as if to shake some sense into me, or perhaps to retrieve something he believed I still possessed. But I was no longer the naive young woman he had so easily manipulated. I anticipated the movement, sidestepped, and he stumbled, his momentum carrying him past me. "You've lost everything, Julian," I said, as he regained his footing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Your reputation, your career, Amelia, even your own sense of self, I suspect. You became so consumed by the act of deception that you forgot who you were, or, perhaps, who you truly wanted to be." He stared at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and something akin to despair. "You think you've won," he spat. "I've reclaimed what is mine," I replied, "and I've learned a valuable lesson. The most potent weapons are not always the loudest. Sometimes, the quiet, irrefutable weight of truth is enough." I turned and began to walk away, leaving him standing alone amidst the silent sentinels of the observatory. I didn't look back. The confrontation had been cathartic, a final closing of a painful chapter. The legal battles would continue, the financial restitution would eventually be made, but the real victory was internal. The following weeks were spent rebuilding. Not my wealth, not my social standing, but my own sense of purpose. I revisited my grandfather's research, the vast library of scientific texts and unpublished notes. He had been a visionary, a man whose curiosity knew no bounds. I realized that my inheritance wasn't just a monetary sum. It was a legacy of intellect, a call to pursue knowledge, to contribute to something larger than myself. I began working with a small, independent research foundation, one dedicated to fostering scientific discovery and ethical innovation. My skills in financial management, honed by the necessity of navigating Julian's manipulations and the subsequent legal complexities, proved surprisingly useful in helping to secure funding and manage projects. It was a world away from the opulent ballrooms and superficial conversations, a world of genuine passion and intellectual rigor. Amelia, I heard through the grapevine, had attempted to rebuild her life. She'd tried to leverage her remaining connections, but the scandal had been too public, too damning. The whispers followed her, a constant reminder of her role in the elaborate deception. I felt a pang of something akin to pity, but it was fleeting. Her choices had been her own, and the consequences, however harsh, were a direct result of them. As for Julian, his legal troubles escalated. The internal investigation at his firm, bolstered by the evidence I had provided, and the confessions of others implicated in his schemes, led to his disbarment and a string of indictments. He disappeared from public life, swallowed by the consequences of his actions. My own life began to take on a new rhythm. The emotional scars remained, a reminder of the betrayal, but they no longer defined me. I had learned to trust my instincts, to be discerning in my relationships, and to never underestimate the power of quiet perseverance. The feeling of being a victim had been replaced by a quiet strength, a resilience forged in the crucible of adversity. One crisp autumn evening, I found myself attending a small symposium on ethical business practices. It was a gathering of individuals dedicated to integrity, to building businesses and lives that were not only prosperous but also principled. As I listened to the speakers, I realized how far I had come. The world that had once seemed so impenetrable, so determined to crush me, now felt like a landscape I could navigate with confidence. The invitations to my future were no longer dictated by others, expectations, or their manipulations. They were self-written, penned with the ink of hard-won experience and a renewed sense of self-worth. The inheritance I had truly reclaimed wasn't the money, but the understanding that true wealth lies in integrity, in resilience, and in the quiet, unyielding power of truth. The story of my life was no longer a chapter dictated by others. It was mine to write, and the pages ahead promised a narrative far more profound and fulfilling than any the opulent ballroom could have ever offered. The owl indeed had seen in the dark, and in that darkness I had found my own guiding light. The invitation to the symposium arrived in the mail, tucked between bills and junk mail, bearing the insignia of a foundation I'd come to admire. It wasn't a gilded, embossed affair, but a simple, elegant cardstock, hinting at substance over show. The topic, ethical innovation, building legacies of integrity, resonated deeply with the new life I was meticulously constructing. Stepping into the venue, a modern building of glass and polished wood that hummed with focused energy, felt like a homecoming. The air was devoid of the cloying floral scents that had once suffocated me. Instead, it carried the subtle aroma of coffee and the low murmur of earnest conversation. People here spoke with a quiet intensity, their eyes alight with genuine curiosity and a shared purpose. This was a far cry from the performative politeness of the reception that had marked the turning point in my life. As I mingled, I found myself drawn into discussions about sustainable practices, transparent supply chains, and the moral imperative of responsible leadership. These were conversations that had been absent from my previous existence, drowned out by the relentless pursuit of personal gain and the hollow echo of social climbing. I spoke about my grandfather's legacy, not as a tale of lost fortune, but as a testament to a mind that sought to understand and improve the world. I shared how his unfinished research on advanced agricultural techniques, once dismissed as eccentricity, was now being explored by the very foundation hosting the symposium. One of the keynote speakers was a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, a renowned astrophysicist whose work on exoplanet detection had revolutionized the field. Her address was a masterclass in clarity and passion. She spoke not just of scientific discovery, but of the ethical responsibilities that came with pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. She recounted a personal anecdote about a rival researcher who had attempted to discredit her work through smear campaigns and fabricated data. Her response, she explained, hadn't been to engage in a tit-for-tat battle, but to meticulously document every piece of evidence, every falsehood, and present it, calmly and irrefutably, to the scientific community. Truth, she had stated, her voice ringing with conviction, has a gravitational pull of its own. It will always draw those who seek it. Her words struck a chord. They echoed the quiet resolve that had settled within me after the public unraveling of Julian and Amelia's deceit. My victory had not been a shout of triumph, but a steady, unwavering demonstration of facts. The ledger, the recordings, the advisor's statement, they were my scientific data, my irrefutable evidence. Later that evening, as the symposium began to wind down, I found myself engaged in a conversation with a man who introduced himself as David Chen, the CEO of a biotech startup focused on developing affordable diagnostics for developing nations. He was articulate, driven, and radiated a genuine concern for the impact of his work. We discovered a shared interest in my grandfather's early theoretical work on bioluminescent energy transfer, a concept he believed could hold immense potential for sustainable lighting solutions. "Your grandfather's notes," David said, leaning closer, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "They're incredibly prescient. He was decades ahead of his time. We've been trying to replicate some of his early experiments, but there's a crucial piece of data missing, a specific alloy composition he mentioned in passing but never elaborated on. It's like the key to unlocking a door." A forgotten memory surfaced. My grandfather, in his cluttered study, had once shown me a small, tarnished locket. Inside, nestled amongst faded velvet, was a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. He'd called it his secret formula, a playful tease, but I'd kept it, a memento of his whimsical genius. I hadn't thought of it in years. I might know where that is. I found myself saying, a ripple of excitement building within me. David's eyebrows shot up. "Really? That would be extraordinary." The prospect of contributing to something meaningful, of breathing new life into my grandfather's legacy in a way that aligned with my own evolved values, felt more exhilarating than any of the fleeting triumphs of my past life. It wasn't about regaining wealth, but about contributing knowledge, about fostering progress. In the weeks that followed, I reconnected with Evelyn, my lawyer. The final settlements were being ironed out, the labyrinthine legal processes slowly concluding. Julian's world had indeed imploded. The disbarment was official, and whispers of further indictments related to money laundering surfaced with alarming regularity. He had vanished, a pariah, his carefully constructed empire reduced to rubble. Amelia, I learned through the infrequent societal gossip that still managed to reach me, had attempted a quiet return to her family's ancestral home in the countryside, seeking refuge from the relentless scrutiny of the city. Her attempts to leverage her remaining connections for a new start had been met with polite but firm rejections. The social currency she had so carelessly gambled had been devalued to nothing. My own financial situation, while not opulent, was stable. The restitution from Julian and Amelia's former associates, a consequence of the undeniable evidence of their complicity, provided a comfortable cushion. It wasn't the vast inheritance I had been promised, but it was enough to fund my newfound endeavors, to live without the crushing weight of financial anxiety. The tarnished locket, unearthed from the depths of a forgotten jewelry box, contained the secret formula. It was a simple yet ingenious combination of rare earth metals that, when combined in precise proportions, created a highly efficient conductive alloy. David and his team at the biotech startup were ecstatic. They immediately began incorporating it into their lighting prototypes, and the results were promising. The early tests showed a significant increase in energy efficiency and a remarkable longevity. My involvement with David's foundation deepened. I found myself not just as a contributor of a forgotten piece of research, but as an active participant in their mission. My understanding of financial structures and risk assessment, honed by the brutal realities of my past, proved invaluable. I helped secure grants, navigated complex regulatory landscapes, and advised on long-term financial sustainability. It was demanding work, but it was also deeply fulfilling. I was building something, not with money, but with purpose. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned fiery hues, I sat on the veranda of my modest apartment, a cup of warm tea in my hands. The city lights twinkled in the distance, no longer a reminder of the gilded cage I had escaped, but a testament to the vibrant, complex world I was now actively a part of. The quiet resolve that had settled within me after the reception had evolved into a steady, unwavering confidence. I no longer felt the need to dissect my victory or to savor the downfall of my tormentors. Their fates were their own, a consequence of their choices, not a measure of my success. The true measure of my success was in the quiet hum of innovation emanating from David's lab, in the potential for real change that my grandfather's rediscovered work now represented. It was in the knowledge that I was no longer a pawn in someone else's game, but an architect of my own future, building it with integrity and purpose. The whispers of scandal had faded, replaced by a different kind of narrative, one of resilience, of rediscovery, and of a quiet, profound strength that had been forged in the fires of adversity. I had reclaimed not just my inheritance, but my agency, my grandfather's intellectual legacy, and most importantly, my own sense of self. The owl, indeed, had seen in the dark. And in that darkness, I had found my own guiding light, a beacon that illuminated a path toward a life of meaning and purpose, a life that was truly my own. The story was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The pages ahead were blank, ready to be filled with my own unwavering hand, guided by the enduring power of truth and the quiet strength of an unbroken spirit.